Welcome to iRise Conversations with Joan. Welcome to iRise Conversations with Joan, where we explore the stories and strategies of people who have overcome adversity and achieved success in their lives. My name is Joan, and I'm the award-winning author of the book, iRise, the 10 Secrets to Getting Up When Life Knocks You Down. Our guest today is Dr. Randall Hansen. He's an educator and advocate for good health, healing, love, well-being, and positivity. He's also the author of the book, Triumph Over Trauma. He's been transforming the lives of people for the past 20 years, with a special focus on life balance, health, foods, and wellness. He discovered the healing power of psychedelic medicines about 3 years ago, and since then, he's been on a strong mission for the intentional use for healing. On today's show, we'll talk about mental health, psychedelic medicines, the intentional use, and wellness in general. Welcome, Dr. Hansen, to the show.
I'm very excited to be here, Joan. Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Thank you. Awesome. So before we get into psychedelic medicine, because that's something that I'm very passionate about, tell us a little bit about your history and how you became interested in this.
Well, it's funny, I've been an educator my entire life, but it wasn't until an exercise about a year ago where we were sitting around and saying, what's one word that identifies you? And I had probably said professor before, maybe because I was, a little ego involved in that. But on this exercise, I said educator, and I really looked back at my history and everything I've done, whether it's teaching in the classroom or writing books or articles, has all been educating. So I thought, oh yeah, okay, so I am an educator, and that's my gift, my passion.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I found the wellness. My healing journey probably started about 15 years ago with looking at the foods that I ate and realizing that some of the food labeling and some of the marketing that's been done to us about foods isn't really accurate. And so the first change was in food and what in that aspect, and looking at things that we were demonized, like eggs used to be demonized, and now
Oh,
they're the
yeah.
wonder food, and so many other things. So that was the start. And then I've always been passionate about nature, but I got more involved in the research in there, and seeing some of the science that shows that there are, besides the mental benefit that we get from being in nature, there's actually physical benefits because the plants and trees uh, emit this chemical called phytoncide that helps us with our health. So that anyway, so that's nature. And then I never have been a big gym person. I was one of those people that on January 1st, I signed up, and then by January 20th, I was done,
I know.
But I found just walking and riding my bike were plenty enough, and then doing some weight training and resistance to keep the muscles too and the bone density. Um, so that was the food, then nature, exercise. And the mental component came much later. And I've always seen, I've been a witness to sort of the struggles with, you and I have both seen. And I love that we have such similar missions about empowering people to live better lives. I mean, when I saw that, it's like, well, we have to be talking because we're almost using the exact same words to describe what we want to do. We just want to, we just want to help people live their best lives.
Mhm.
And so I started, I was looking at social media and just the, cat fights and arguments going on there. And then with COVID and just the mental breakdown that was happening. And we've seen it, we've seen all the statistics, suicide rates going up, mental health, even of our children, which is, that's frightening me. That's, the mental health of our children is the worst it's ever been in some of these recent studies. Anyway, I still knew nothing about psychedelics, and I was still sort of under the impression that antidepressants seemed to be doing okay in their jobs. And um, then it was a couple books that opened up the door to some of the ridiculous research that was done on antidepressants, and basically that if anything, they simply just deal with the symptoms, which is
Mhm.
important, but they were designed for temporary use. Like when you had a depressive period, you would take the antidepressant for like 3 or 4 days until you started to get out of that cycle, and then you would stop. But it's now become a daily thing for people for the rest of their lives, and sometimes multiple antidepressants and an anti-anxiety.
Mhm.
And then about 3 years ago, a little more than 3 years, 3.5 years ago, my wife and I are both passionate about veterans, and she just by chance was listening to a podcast with Jesse Gould, who is the founder of Heroic Hearts Project, and he was telling his personal story about coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan and thinking he was okay going back to Wall Street. He had a finance degree. He thought he was going to just go back in his world of finance, and he found out that he wasn't coping. He felt like he had lost his mission. He had post-traumatic stress. He was self-medicating, as so many veterans do, with alcohol. And he had heard about ayahuasca, this tea that's brewed in the Amazon, and found out it's psychedelic. And he was like, "No, I'm a dare kid. No, he said, I never even tried cannabis, let alone anything else. So I'm not about to, I'm not about to go from nothing to psychedelic. It sounds crazy, but he did." And he found the most beautiful healing. And Jenny and I looked at each other and like, what the heck is ayahuasca? The only psychedelic I had heard of was LSD because it was popular back in
Mhm.
Woodstock and the hippies and on counterculture and all that stuff. And so that began. Jenny was so moved by it that she contacted Jesse, and the next day, practically, she volunteered and still volunteering with that organization today. She's on the leadership team over there. And we just, both of us just did just a deep dive into the research, into why haven't we heard about this healing modality, and if it can, you'd see these veterans and you could just see it in their face, like before going down for the psychedelic journey, there you could see the trauma, the worry, the lines on their face. And after that psychedelic experience, even if they weren't smiling, a lot of them were, you could just see their eyes were lit up again. They were renewed, and so that just began this process of adding that to this whole wellness component. Uh, here's a Yes, talk therapy is a great tool if you can afford it and you're open to it. Talk therapy is fantastic. Psychedelics is another modality for that. Breath work, meditation. So there's a bunch of different ways you can tackle this. But the key for me was you can tackle it without having to do these pharmaceuticals that are or self-medicating, which is worse. I mean, there's one story in my book where the woman was just so desperate. She went to her doctor. She's already on uh, Xanax and antidepressants, and she said, "I can't go on this way. What can happen?" And the doctor's like, "Let's up your dosage."
Oh my God.
Oh, and I was like, "No, no, no!" And she finally called her husband, and her husband, interestingly enough, was a Navy SEAL who got treatment through ibogaine, which is the gnarliest psychedelic, and we can talk about that later. But anyway, so he had received his healing, and she refused. And she's like, "I'm not going to do a psychedelic." Same thing as Jesse had done. And finally, she called him and said, "If if you don't get me on a plane tomorrow, I might not be here." And they had 5 children, and he got her on that plane. And it's just the most amazing thing. She had this most amazing healing. Um, I'm trying to think of the quote she has, but she talked about it, as certainly one of the most meaningful experiences in her life. She felt love and hope for the first time in her life. She understood this childhood trauma that had blocked her from letting people love her the way she we all deserve to be loved. And to me, that's also one of the other aspects of psychedelics is not only the mental healing, not only this really crazy new part that we're discovering of the brain actually growing from psychedelic use because it creates new neural pathways. But the third thing is almost every story, and now I've heard more than 100 and hundreds in my time here, but almost every story with psychedelics ends with something about bliss
Mm.
or love, never feeling that unconditional love like they did in that moment. And to me, again, if nothing else, that's a feeling we all should want to, feel
Yeah.
and express. So that's long story how I got into the process.
But yeah, it's so good. And you know, I say that I'm passionate about this, but it's a little bit more than passion. Like you and I are speaking today only because Peru is on lockdown. So Lima is on lockdown. They're having some political unrest. I'm supposed to be in Peru right now on an ayahuasca retreat.
Oh,
And that
wow.
was the whole purpose, really, to get that healing and transformation. And so I know the benefits. I've heard stories of people who've been through it. Their lives have never been the same. And
Yeah.
most of us, I won't say all of us, but most of us, and I think it's almost all of us, have been through some trauma that's blocking a lot of things in our lives. And most of the times we're not even aware of some of these things.
Yeah.
And I think, now is such a perfect time because, like you mentioned, we went through COVID. I think COVID just made everything worse, but not because
Yep.
it brought out new things. I think all these things were already there, but
Yep.
COVID just multiplied it by 1,000. And for
Yeah.
me, I was at the point where I need to get help. I need to fix what I think is broken. I may not be able to pinpoint what it is in my life. And then I heard about psychedelics, and I've been really interested in it for about a year now. And that's why I was also going to go on my own healing journey. But again, like you said, when people hear psychedelics, they think of hard drugs, LSD, because they think it's some recreational whatever they think it is. So a lot of people are not aware of it. They're not aware of the power. They're not aware of the type of healing that it can do into people's lives. So before we get into what psychedelics can do for people, how would you describe psychedelics? Because again, we already mentioned if you're suffering from depression, they give you antidepressant, anxiety pills, whatever it is. What are psychedelics, and what's the history? How did this come about? Who invented this?
Well, let me just go 1 second backwards to say, because I was just listening to your podcast with Mr. J, and I loved so much of it because he, Dr. Matei, we're all in this alignment that trauma is yeah, it's pervasive in throughout all our lives, and some of it we know because it's major trauma, but so much of it is just small trauma that it's trauma. None of this, we can't discount it. It's still trauma, but it may be it's almost like small little paper cuts
Mm-hmm.
that okay, that's push it down, and all of a sudden now it's bleeding, and now what do you do? And so I just want to reinforce that point and give you one other example. There's another veteran story. He went for ayahuasca, and he talked about just some of the horrible things he saw and encountered. And that first night, he's like, "Bring it on, Mother Ayahuasca! Bring on! I want to face this." And the first night, instead of any war stuff, he saw this little boy,
Mm.
and it turned out it was him as a little boy, and he discovered he had been abused. And this is what set him on this path, and also and sadly kind of made him a good soldier because he had that anger in him from that abuse, but he had no recollection of it. So after the first night, he's like, what the heck is happening? And then, of course, the second night, once he cleared that trauma, the second night was all about the war. And then he's like, okay, but where's, okay, now 2 nights of kind of trauma, where's the love? And then the third night, he said, was now that all the trauma had been cleared, was, shooting up into the universe and seeing, the stars and the sky and bliss. And so a lot of this trauma, I know you've talked about this, and I just want to reinforce it. We our brains are really good at trying to block that stuff down. And especially if we grew up in a household, like my household, my mom and pop, my father were always sweep it under the rug. That was their little line.
Yeah.
And we swept a lot of stuff under the rug, and it has to come out at some point.
Yeah.
All right. So psychedelics. The funny, sad, whatever way you want to look at it about psychedelics is a lot of these psychedelics are actually naturally occurring plants and fungi. And for example, the magic psilocybin is the magic and the magic mushrooms, and there are about 150 or 160 known. There are probably more than that varieties of mushrooms that have that all over the world. And so we see that the history of psychedelics goes back, thousands and thousands of years to early indigenous cultures. We see we see mushrooms in a sacred way on the cave drawings, on the petroglyphs and things like that. And so, especially ayahuasca and psilocybin in Mexico and in South America have this long, long tradition of use by typically more by the medicine men and women, but medicine men traditionally, and then healing the entire community. And it went that way for years and years and years, of course, until the Spanish came in, and they were in the Catholic Church was trying to convert all the indigenous people, of course, to Catholicism, and they determined that psychedelics were not in line with the religion, and kind of pushed it underground. That was sort of the beginning of government interference, whatever we want to call it, with that, although that was more quasi-government because it was also religious. And then we have just some other really interesting stories. LSD was discovered by accident, and in fact, the famous story of the chemist who discovered LSD was trying to find something else, didn't know it was psychoactive. Took some and then went on a bicycle ride, and the most famous bicycle ride because he was like the road was coming up and around him and the trees were attacking him. Excuse me. And so it's just funny. So somebody like so LSD was developed in the lab. Ketamine is another psychedelic that was developed more as an anesthetic, but they've later discovered that it has these psychoactive properties. MDMA is also a chemical developed in the lab, and so we have these what we call classic psychedelics, which are psilocybin, mescaline, which comes from cacti, on very small numbers of cacti, but from cacti. Where was I? LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, which we mentioned from magic mushrooms, ibogaine, which comes from Africa, ayahuasca, which is a brew of two different a plant, a vine and a shrub, and it makes this tea with DMT, which is a classic psychedelic. And then we have ketamine and MDMA. And so all these drugs have been seen to have an impact on the brain. Different MDMA and ketamine interact with a different part of the brain than the other ones do, but they all have this impact. And they have different properties. Some are more visually, that kind of the classic, what people talk about with a psychedelic experience, which, by the way, is not what it's a fun side aspect of psychedelics to see the crazy geometric patterns. And like for me, when I'm listening to music in a psychedelic, especially with psilocybin, I am like in the music, and you're just kind of tumbling in this funnel of music. It's crazy, but that's just the fun. That's just kind of like the ramp up, and then the real work is when it gets deeper into the psychedelics, and you have the visions, which are the showing you the trauma, or showing you what needs to be fixed, or sometimes giving you a solution to things. What we call a digital download, where I want to solve this problem. How do I solve this problem? And the psychedelic, during this journey, the psychedelics actually give you, it's almost like a brainstorming session with yourself. It's crazy. Anyway, so and what we found, like I said, to me, the most fascinating part, what we found is, we thought the brain stopped growing in your, early 20s. And what we're seeing with psychedelics is that they are increasing these neural pathways. So one of the reasons scientists think we have these novel experiences is because the psychedelics are creating new connections in our brain from new parts of the brain that hadn't communicated
Mhm.
before. And the other cool part they do, which is what helps with OCD and addiction and depression, is psychedelics also remove non-working neural pathways. So OCD, the great way someone explained OCD to me is that it's a never-ending loop that they can't get out of. And they're stuck in this loop. It's like a hamster wheel. They can't get
Mhm.
out. And the psychedelics just go in there and just go pop, pull that pathway, and all of a sudden the OCD is gone. And it's amazing to
Wow.
me. Yeah. So there's just so much potential. We had so much research in the 1960s here in the US and abroad. And LSD was being used by psychologists and family therapists, and it was found to be a great tool. Um, it was actually being used, LSD was also being tested to be used for alcohol addiction. And, but in the late 60s, too much counterculture was happening, and psychedelics tends to make people happier and more about love and compassion and empathy. And here we were in the height of this Vietnam War, and we needed soldiers, not peace and love. And so
Happy.
the government made a decision to say,
Mm.
we're shutting all this down. So all psychedelics became Schedule One, which is the highest level of scheduling, which says these medications have no value whatsoever, which is so crazy because we have all this research that proves the value. And so so today, in the last 10 years, we are redoing basically all that research we did decades ago. And it's finally now making inroads that we are seeing that the FDA later this year or maybe early next year is going to approve psilocybin and MDMA for therapeutic use.
That is amazing. Well, that's in the
Yeah.
US. I'm not sure about Canada, but that
Not
is
ca- but Canada's making moves too, and we're seeing it around the world, little bits by bit. So
that is awesome. And so you mentioned, certain things that it can help with depression, addiction, unhappiness, sadness, childhood trauma,
yeah,
PTSD. Some people might be listening and thinking, well, that doesn't apply to me. Are there other things, other signs that people might, other symptoms that people might have that might make them a good candidate for the intentional use of psychedelics?
I think anyone who mental health, mental wellness,
Mhm.
is such a hard thing to talk about because we keep talking. This is a year, no more stigma on mental health, but yet I feel like there still is. Again, just as psychedelics, just as we were bombarded with propaganda about psychedelics, I think we've been same thing bombarded with mental health. One flew over the cuckoo's nest,
Yeah.
or that kind of image that we have, and I know so many people who mostly men who say, no, I'll never do talk therapy because that's not a manly thing. I'm like, dude, it is a man to admit you have a problem, you need help. That's a man. Anyway, so I think anyone that's struggling, because yes, if you've been clinically diagnosed with depression or anxiety, it's very clear that psilocybin and others have a not necessarily a permanent impact, but rather than taking a SSRI every day for the rest of your life, you might have to do a psilocybin journey every 6 months or something like that, just to keep the depression in
Yeah.
check.
Hmm.
Um, but you know, we're seeing things, people with eating disorders, uh,
Hmm.
psychedelics seems to have potential to work with that. Again, OCD at any level, whether it's mild or severe, psychedelics can help. And so and I don't want to make it, a friend of mine has a great book, Matt Zeman has a book called Psychedelics for Everyone. But then he says, but they're not really for everyone. But the idea is, yes, we want to make it available for everyone because this is a healing modality that just is showing so much promise and so much promise for getting to the actual trauma and the healing rather than just a cover up or covering up the symptoms of it. And so I'd say, I think I heard on a previous podcast someone was talking about being stuck. So yeah, if you're stuck, whether it's in a relationship, your job, your career, that's another candidate because psychedelics, again, we talk about sort of three elements of a psychedelic experience. One is the preparation, where you are doing the research, like you were doing, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that too. But so doing the research about, well, which medicine seems to be the best one that might work for me and what I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why in my book, I try to have stories from all the different psychedelic medicines so you can sort of find maybe one that resonates with you. So that's the first step. And we typically say the medicine kind of finds you. And so, and by that could be you're just browsing the internet and all of a sudden there's a Time magazine article about psilocybin mushrooms and it's like, oh, well, that's interesting. And then that's to me an example of the medicine kind of reaching out to you sort of sneakily. But then also in that preparation stage is determining how or where, why you're doing it. You set an intention. This is what I want to achieve in this journey, in this experience. It could be as simple as I just want to be healed, or show me what I'm afraid to see. That's a scary one, but a good one to ask. Yeah, yeah. Because then when you see it, you're like, no, I changed my mind. And by the way, ayahuasca will definitely show you what you don't want to see.
I was ready for it.
Anyway, and then the second step is, of course, the actual experience, the journey. And then the third element of that is the integration part, where now that you've seen all these things, what do you do and how do you change your life and how do you incorporate all these lessons into the new you? And again, I love to use this word because I do, but I know a lot of people say it's overused, but I think psychedelics strips us down to our authentic self. And that I'm such a believer in that. So many years I thought I was sort of being authentic, but I realized in hindsight I was wearing like 5 different masks. So maybe I was authentic under each mask, but I was wearing a mask. I was protecting myself. I was wearing a mask to fit in.
Yeah.
And I think so many of us do that. I think that's the format. I've lost your question, but go ahead.
Like I just like look, because I could talk about this all day, every single day. And when you said the medicine finds you, I remember my first introduction to magic mushrooms was I was having a massage. So my massage therapist, and he's just like,
oh, wow.
Have you ever tried mushrooms? And he's like, oh, you can get mushrooms from this chocolate mushrooms. And he said, I can't promise that it's going to do anything because, like you said, it will find you. It will reveal itself to you if you want it to. And so that was my first experience. And he said, just take microdoses because you don't want to go, you may not be able to handle what it is that you see. And I completely forgotten about that experience because it was about maybe 2 years ago.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, like it was such a calming experience. It like I didn't see anything scary. So I was happy with that. But now that I remember it, because I still have it actually in my fridge, and I'm thinking maybe tonight is the night. We're gonna try that again. But I think what is so key to me is a lot of people are struggling, a lot of people are stuck, a lot of people are on antidepressants. They have no one to talk to, they don't know how to move forward with their lives, and they're just struggling. And this is an option that not many people talk about. Yeah, you said over the last couple of years it's becoming more and more popular, but not popular enough. Out of every 10 friends I have, maybe only one person has heard of it. And I think this is such a good time, especially just coming out of the pandemic, and everybody is trying to be woke, we're trying to be our authentic selves, we're trying to find ourselves. People are now like, okay, I want to find my purpose, I want to have a better life. Like what obtained before doesn't obtain anymore. I'm tired of the struggle, I'm tired of the rat race, I really want to do things differently. This is an option. This is a great way to heal from all your past trauma, and like you said, to now really connect with that source or God or whatever you want to call it, where you can now be your true self and really walk on your purpose. My next
and you know, you raised a great point, the spirituality point. You know, mostly I'm just so focused on healing because I think we, like you said, we're just so desperately in need of it. But the spirituality is fascinating to me because, again, a whole range of people, from those who are, you know, totally don't believe in God or creation at all, pure science, and to the ones who are super religious, and they all almost all come out of that saying, "Wow, I saw the creator, or I saw God, or I now believe in a greater power." And so that's also
Yeah,
a tremendous benefit of this medicine.
it is. So like I live in Canada, and there's probably people who live in God knows what part of the world.
Yeah,
Where can people, again, where can people get this stuff? One.
yeah.
And secondly, because we already talked about self-medicating and how that is not always a good idea. I know your book, I'm going to talk about your book in a second, but your book covers all the
Mhm.
different types that might kind of guide people towards maybe this is the best one for you. Is it safe for people to acquire this stuff and do it on their own in their homes by themselves and go through this experience, do the preparation, go on this journey, integrate all by yourself?
Yeah.
Or is there a better way to do it?
Oh boy, that's a wonderful question with a massive can of worms. You know, my personal belief is that if someone has a partner
Mm.
who will be there and also go through the preparations, so they are prepared, and they start with, you know, something that's a very low dose. You know, something like magic mushrooms are available quite everywhere. I mean, you still have to know someone to know someone, but I mean, you could also go to your farmer's cow pasture and probably find some psychedelic mushrooms there. And then all you have to do is dry them. But um, right now, you know, the the line, I guess, from it's such a gray area. You know, we have these pockets in different cities, Vancouver and Seattle, Portland, and then states like Colorado and Oregon that are allowing, you know, have done some either decrim measures or allowing some therapy, you know, moving forward with therapeutic approach to psychedelics. Um, but like you said, I feel like it's just going so slowly. And there are places online. There are places. My first psilocybin was with the chocolate, by the way, so that's fairly common, I think. Although the purists would poo-poo us because they, of course, brewed their own tea from the mushrooms. But I like the chocolate with the mushroom in it myself. Um, but I just lost where we're going on that. We were talking about availability. Yeah. So to me, the gray area where it's happening right now is there are some legitimate websites, some I think probably mostly in Canada, but that do ship to the US that ship microdosing only. But you can take 20 microdoses and make it into, you know, so it's weird to me. Like I've like, how is this possible? But I know hundreds of people have gotten their medication that way. So it's
Mm-hmm.
just a weird gray area. It's like the San Pedro cactus has mescaline in it. And I could have that being growing right outside my door. It's completely legal, but as soon as I cut into it to get to the mescaline, then it
Yeah.
becomes illegal. So
Mm.
it's just we have just some weird and you know, the purists would say, why are any plant? How can you outlaw a plant? And it is weird that we've outlawed a couple cacti, mushrooms, and so anyway, it's odd. But I would say, to me, the best idea is to contact your local psychedelic society.
Okay.
They don't have the medications there, but they are people who are like-minded, who are in the psychedelic space, so they probably do know. So it's the Kevin Bacon, 6 degrees of separation or whatever number of degrees of
Yeah.
separation. So, and the psychedelic societies are also great places to meet people. As you said, you could talk to your friends and family, but either you're going to get crickets back or strange looks back, or they don't have the information. But the psychedelic societies do, and if you just go to Meetup, most of them are on Meetup, and you just type in, Toronto Psychedelic Society or something like that, and they'll come up. To me, that's the best way. There are also quite a number of clinical trials going on across the world, but mostly in the U.S., some in Canada, some in Europe, and over a wide variety of subjects. And so that's the safest, legalist way to do it, because you then become a member of a scientific study. There's also a website called Retreat Guru, which lists all the legal sites across the world. So that's probably maybe how you found your ayahuasca one. So that's the way to do it. But that's the sad part. We have to fly, thousands of miles to get the treatment that should be available to us, right here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do know, I definitely do not get the medications from off the street or anything like that, because it's just too scary with fentanyl and other weird
Mm-hmm.
stuff being added to it. There are also websites that claim to do it that are just scammers and are going to rip you off. So that's why I say the best way is just find a friend, a connection,
Yeah.
someone in a psychedelic society that can direct you to a safe spot. And like I said, I know, like I said, 4 or 5 companies that do these microdose tablets. And that's also, if you want to start with microdosing, like you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
that is probably the trendiest thing right now, because there's no scary hallucinations, there's no psychedelic experience, but you're still getting the neuroplasticity aspect, you're still getting the benefit of the psychedelics. And I can say I've microdosed with LSD, and I did that when I was finishing up the book. And I have this joke, because at one point I was typing on my keyboard, and I turned to my partner, who was sitting next to me at the time, and she's just like looking at me with this weird look on her face. And I'm like, what? And she's like, I think the keyboard's going to start smoking in a second, because I was just typing. So, because it was like the LSD, and it wasn't so much like just crazy typing. It was like the words in the paragraphs were just coming to me so fast. I just wanted to put them down before I
Yeah.
forgot them.
Yeah.
And so, you know, most of the research with microdosing is a little sketchy, mostly anecdotal. So we can't say for sure all the benefits, but I mean, anecdotally, people are talking about reducing migraines, uh,
Mm-hmm.
there's horrible cluster headaches. They're not getting those by microdosing, reducing anxiety. I had someone whose husband had a stroke, and he's been microdosing and getting some, again, clearly could be coincidental and who knows what. But after a year of no tingling in the fingers, he's able to start moving his fingers just a teeny bit.
Wow.
So, I mean, who knows in 20 years what research, it's not, again, it's not the miracle cure, it's not the magic pill, but it has so much promise. And especially if people are willing to invest doing the work afterwards. So it's not just, I take this pill and my life is perfect. It's, I take this medicine and now I reshape my life. Now I know how to shape it to make it the way I want it to be.
Exactly. And I think that that's something that's very, very key. There's still work that needs to be done. And that's where you were talking about the
Yeah.
integration part of it,
Yeah.
because nothing is going to happen just magically. Yes, you will get the healing, but then what next? You still have
Yep.
to take the necessary steps. So let's talk a little bit about your book, Triumph Over Trauma. Why did you write the book, and who is it for?
All right. I'll start with, I call who it's for the psychedelically curious,
Okay.
because it's been really well received within the psychedelic community, but it's like, well, you guys don't need to read this book. You know all this stuff.
Really?
So it's geared for those who, yeah, maybe saw the Netflix series, or saw the book, Michael Pollan's book on the bookshelf, or saw the Time magazine article or the Rolling Stone, or heard about Aaron Rodgers and the football, and so somehow they heard about this, but they don't know anything about it. And so the book is about one third. Here's the history. Here's all the different types of medicines. Here's how they seem to work. Um, Here's some interesting facts about them. Quotes from inspiring quotes from different psychedelic leaders. And then the bulk of the book are these 23 stories of healing, 20 from these full macrodosing, full on journeys, and 3 from microdosing. And how this came about, I've definitely have not planned to write a book. I think you know this personally. That being an author is not the lucrative. Oh, I have my. I
No.
just bought my Hummer with my book
Yeah.
sales. No, no. So, and there's some pretty decent books on psychedelics out there. Some are a little older than others, but not much has changed except for the new research has come out. But I was on. I discovered that LSD is my medication, and I like you, I kind of shied away from it at first because of all the
Misconception.
baggage associated with it.
Yeah.
And to me, LSD is just the most gentle, beautiful thing. I don't have crazy hallucinations. I went. I have this beautiful deck and that looks out right over here behind me, and it was a late summer day, and I had an LSD journey, and I had wanted my trees to be going crazy. They weren't. And I think the message was, hey, you're in nature. Appreciate nature for nature. It doesn't have to be super, super, crazy nature. But so it's just a very peaceful journey. It wasn't. I didn't have any great insights or anything like that. But then at the very end of the journey, as I was sort of coming down from the experience, I just, it's so hard to describe this experience, but it was like this force of energy that just said, you need to write this book, and here's the outline. And I literally got up, ran inside, grabbed a piece of paper and a pen, went back out. I had to go right back to my same spot. And the final book outline is about 90% of what I wrote down from that journey, from that experience. The only thing the medicine didn't tell me about was the microdosing, and I added that mostly because, while gathering these stories, microdosing became a bigger and bigger thing. Like I said, it's quite trendy now, and it's a great way to, like I said, to get introduced to the medicine, to see it's a gentle way, and it helps build trust. So it's like, well, okay, now that I've microdosed with psilocybin, maybe I am ready for a full journey. I am going to go to that refrigerator and grab that chocolate bar.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it wasn't like this voice that was like, Rand, you need to write this book. But and that's the cool thing about the psychedelics. We talk about this experience being ineffable. We can't describe it. People talk about hearing God, but they don't hear God's voice, but they hear it. I mean, it's so crazy to try to explain this. So the book, so this energy or whatever said, the focus of this book has to be stories, because this is how people best learn and relate, is through storytelling. And so I was like, great, okay. So now I have my marching orders. And then it was just a process of, I'd been in the psychedelic space for a couple of years, so I knew a bunch of people. So those were the easy stories to get. And then it was sort of asking a friend of a friend of a friend, and just keep asking. And I probably ended up asking about 80 people to get the 23 stories. And, again, I've now read these stories or edited, again, from writing the book. How many times did you go editing those books? So I've seen these stories so many times, and yet, if I were to pick up one and start reading it to you right now, I would still start tearing up because it's just powerful. I mean, you can feel the change in people.
Yeah.
Again, I just focus on this one guy Ryan who said he's something like he was floating on a sea of bliss.
Oof.
And it just, yeah, your mind just go, oh yeah, I think I'd like to do
I love
that.
I like that. And I
Yeah,
don't know. I don't know if I feel good or I feel bad because honestly, I had been preparing for my own journey, for my own transformation, my own healing. And then for whatever reason, I believe everything happens for a reason. So
it
now
does.
my journey has been pushed. So I'm going to be going to Lima in September to do it. And I really want to encourage anyone who maybe you might be hearing about this for the very first time and you may be thinking, oh, maybe sitting on the fence. That's fine. There's a lot of research out there. You can buy the book, Triumph Over Trauma. You can read other people's stories. Like Rand said, people learn from hearing other people's stories, and you might find someone in there that really resonates with you. But I think for me, we cannot ignore this anymore. I don't think that the world can ignore this anymore. I think it's only going to get more and more popular. Hopefully, it'll become more and more available, easier to have access to, and you might be able to do it in your home country. For now, we still have to travel. I was going to have to travel for 2 days just to get it done. But I think it might help you get to where you're going. Ryan, you're talking about writing your book. I had the same experience, even though I didn't take any psychedelics, but that's how I wrote my book. It was just downloaded to me, first the outline and then the
Wow.
words. And that's how I was typing like a crazy lunatic.
Yeah.
So it is possible, and everybody can have that. And I truly believe that that's how we're so powerful. We just don't know. We've forgotten. And this is a way to tap into that creation inside of us, that greatness. We don't have to struggle and suffer and keep grinding and trying to figure out, should I do this? Asking a billion people, what should I do next? Try and look for validation all over the place. This is the best way for you to connect to that thing inside of you and really know what your purpose is. And there's nothing more blissful than knowing. This is a knowing. This is not a guessing. This is not a, did I read it in a book somewhere? You know that this is what you're meant to do. And I think that that's why we're all called to this earth. We all have a purpose, and this is one way for you to find it.
Yeah, and I love beautiful words there, Joan. And I love the aspect of that. Yeah, the healing is in us. The medicine doesn't heal us. It just shows us that we have that power within us that we have just covered up and blocked and all this thing. So that's so beautifully said. We can heal ourselves. This medicine just is a tool to cut through that process so much faster, so much more efficiently, and then and let us be our true selves.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here with us. And any final words before we wrap it
up? No, I wish you luck. I think it's true. I'm glad you're going to the jungle for ayahuasca. I did ayahuasca at an underground center that I tried to vet, but when they're underground, you can't vet them that well. And it was the medicine was great, but the experience was just horrific. And if I wasn't where I was in my place, I probably would have been traumatized by it. So yeah, that's why Retreat Guru is so great, because these are, legitimate healing centers already vetted out. And so it's just a matter of choosing which one you want to go to. But again, it's just sad that we have to go out of the country to do that. But I'm so excited. I want to connect with you back in the fall, but when you come back from that experience and we can talk about it more. I'd love to do that.
I can't wait. I'm very excited for that. Thank you so much. I'll be sure to include the link to your book so that people can learn more about how psychedelics can help transform and heal and change our lives. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And I really want to speak to everyone who might be struggling. The world is a dark place now. We all know that. It hasn't been easy. COVID did not make things any easier. So if you're feeling stuck or you feel like you have no one to talk to, there's always help available. You can reach out to me, reach out to Dr. Hansen. There is help available for you to move forward with your life. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you to everyone who's listened. I wish you an amazing week, and I'll see you same time next week on iRise Conversations with Joan. Thanks for listening.